in our headlines at this hour. South and North Korea locking horns at the UN over the latter's blatant violations of Security Council resolutions, while Kim Jongun presides over a key Workers' Party conference. Finance Minister Choo Kyung-ho says price stability is the government's economic priority for now, as the OECD claims inflation in South Korea this year may hit 4.8%. And the World Health Organization says more than 1,000 cases of monkeypox have been identified in 29 non-endemic countries thus far. Welcome to the Daily Report. It's Thursday afternoon, June 9th here in South Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee. We start with news about a fire at an office building in the city of Daegu that is believed to have killed at least 7 people. For more, I have Lee standing by. Shiu, I understand details are evolving even as we speak, of course, but what can you tell us about the fire as of now?
Well, Sunny, a 7-story office building near Daegu District Court caught fire this morning at around 10:55. It's been reported that 7 people have died due to the fire. Around 46 more have been injured. According to the fire department, initial reports of the fire described a cloud of black smoke rising from the building's second floor and heard a loud bang similar to the sound of an explosion. Some 50 fire trucks and 160 firefighters were dispatched to the site, and the fire took around 20 minutes to extinguish. The fire department is still checking to see if there are any more casualties. Now, the building held many law firms due to its proximity to the courthouse. While the exact cause of fire is being investigated, the police are looking into the possibility of arson. That's all I have for now at this hour, but I'll be back with more updates in a later newscast. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Shiu, thank you for that. That was my colleague Lee at the news center, that is, with details about the fire in Daegu, which we will continue to cover throughout the day. Elsewhere, South Korea's top UN delegate has renewed calls on Pyongyang to surrender its nuclear weapons ambitions. This while his North Korean counterpart claims the regime has the right to defend itself. Our Kim Hyo-sun reports.
The two Koreas came head-to-head over the issue of sanctioning the North over its latest missile provocations. Seoul's top representative to the UN on Wednesday called on Pyongyang to halt provocative activities and engage in dialogue.
We urge the DPRK to stop such provocative actions, abide by all relevant Security Council resolutions, and respond to the call for dialogue and peace on the Korean Peninsula through complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization.
The remarks were made in a UN General Assembly meeting to discuss the latest failure of the UNSC to pass a resolution on North Korea. During the same meeting, North Korea's UN ambassador defended the regime's development of ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons to protect it against, quote, direct threats posed by the U.S.
If DPRK conducted tests constituted a threat to the international community, UN Security Council should clarify convincingly why ICBM test by United States, hostile to us, is not regarded as threat to the DPRK.
This comes as China and Russia defended their vetoes of a resolution calling for tough new sanctions on Pyongyang. The close allies reiterated their opposition to increased sanctions, blaming Washington for heightening tensions on the Korean Peninsula. They also urged the U.S. to suspend its joint military operations in the region. Beijing and Moscow also insisted that it's high time for dialogue between North Korea and the Biden administration. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Well, the U.S. has reiterated its intentions to respond robustly to a potential 7th nuclear test by North Korea. Addressing members of the media on Wednesday, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan added that Washington is closely monitoring the situation. Meanwhile, at the UN, U.S. officials that claim the Biden administration is seeking dialogue with Pyongyang without preconditions, and that this stance has been relayed to senior North Korean officials. And across the border in North Korea, Kim Jong-un presided over a key Workers' Party conference earlier on Wednesday. According to the state-run Korea Central News Agency today, North Korea is hosting its 5th plenary session of the party's 8th Central Committee, which continues on this Thursday. Details discussed there have yet to be disclosed, with the news agency simply saying the committee is reviewing state policies and deciding on important matters. Just a day after the World Bank cut its growth forecast for the global economy this year, the OECD on Wednesday shared a similar downward revision, also citing Russia's aggression against Ukraine. In fact, the OECD lowered its 2022 outlook for South Korea to 2.7%, while raising the country's inflation prospects for the year to 4.8%. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
OECD's lowered South Korea's economic outlook to 2.7% from 3.0%. According to its projection report on Wednesday, South Korea's consumption is set to strengthen but will be impeded by high inflation. OECD also warns that a possible shortage of rare gases usually sourced from Russia and Ukraine could weaken South Korea's semiconductor exports. It also added that the country's monetary policy should aim to keep inflation expectations anchored. Other countries also saw their projections mostly lowered. In fact, world economy's projection was lowered to 3% from its previous 4.5% from last December. This is because that projection came before Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February.
And let me start by saying that we're all paying the price of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. First and foremost, Ukrainians, obviously. But the war is also a big shock to the world economy. It will drag growth down, and it is pushing inflation higher.
Inflation is set to stay for a little longer, according to the OECD, with the peak to come at 8.5% this year in OECD countries before slipping to 6.0% next year. For South Korea, the rate was raised to 4.8%. This is more than a double of what was expected before. It's also the highest since 1998 during the Asian financial crisis. The rate is expected to go below 4% next year. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And staying with the worrying prospects, a state-run think tank believes South Korea's economic rebound is looking to be hampered by a host of external factors. Here's Yoon.
It seems there's a difficult road ahead for the local economy. South Korea's economic think tank, the Korea Development Institute, published a report on Thursday. It pointed to global supply chain disruptions and rising raw material prices for hindering not only the manufacturing industry, but the Korean economy as a whole. Growing inflationary pressure on the supply side also made consumer prices shoot up. May's headline inflation stood at 5.4%, up from 4.8% in April. Core inflation, excluding food and energy, was also higher in May at 3.4% compared to 3.1% the month before. But some good news came from the service industry. Thanks to eased social distancing measures, face-to-face businesses have been showing signs of recovery. In fact, service production recorded another month of high growth, jumping from 3.7% in March to 5.1% in April. However, exports, which did improve in May from the previous month, showed signs of slowing. Much of that had to do with China's zero-COVID policy and other external uncertainties. With that, the KDI says the domestic economy should keep a close eye on the war in Ukraine and other countries' tightening monetary policies. 이지윤, Arirang News.
Price stability is the government's economic priority, so said Finance Minister Choo Kyung-ho on this Thursday during the second ministerial meeting on economic matters. He urged all related entities to examine their efforts to this end. External inflationary pressure has reportedly been weighing on South Korea's consumer prices, pushing them to fresh highs. Meanwhile, come next week, the government will disclose its economic policy direction, and of much interest is the extent to which the new administration will go to cutting the red tape of the corporate sector to facilitate economic expansion. Unionized cargo truckers in South Korea are staging their third day of walkouts nationwide, and already the strike has been hindering work at construction sites. Our Yoon explains.
The Safe Trucking Freight Rate system was launched in 2020 to prevent dangerous driving and to guarantee minimum freight rates. However, with the policy set to expire at the end of this year, cargo truck drivers are on strike for the third day over their demands for an extension. And while the walkout continues, the supply and demand cycle is seeing disruptions. Construction sites that are normally busy with trucks moving building materials like cement and steel are seeing very minimal movement. For cement plants, the abrupt suspension of the transport of cargo is resulting in losses of some 15.3 billion won, or over $12 million in daily sales.
It's the second day that our shipments of cement products have come to a complete stop. If this situation continues for a few more days, it will become difficult for cement plants to supply materials to construction sites.
The situation is the same for the supply of other construction raw materials like steel, with large companies also affected. Hyundai's steel plant in Pohang has not been able to process any shipments for 2 consecutive days, and POSCO's steel plant has suspended 20,000 tons of their usual 49,000 tons of daily shipments. And disruptions to the supply chain could mean even more problems ahead.
Construction sites usually have a stock of essential materials that can last for a few days, but a further prolonged strike by the Cargo Truckers Union is expected to cause massive damage to the supply and demand of cement and steel materials, and therefore construction sites.
Construction companies in the Seoul metropolitan area have reached the brink of bankruptcy, and a prolonged strike would only worsen the situation for an industry that is already bearing the brunt of soaring diesel prices and rising construction material costs. 이은진, Arirang News.
On the local political front, the Yoon administration has been accused of partiality in presidentially appointed positions by placing priority on those who served as prosecutors. While the president himself has responded by pointing to examples over in the US. Our presidential office correspondent Jongun reports.
미국 같은 나라 보면은 그런 그 거버먼트 어토니 경험을 가진 사람들이 정관계에 아주 폭넓게 진출하고 있습니다. 그게 법치국가 아니겠습니까?
That's President Yoon Suk-yeol's defense when asked about the latest controversy over the new South Korean leaders' personnel appointment leaning too heavily on those with prosecutorial background. This follows a little over a dozen posts being filled with former prosecutors so far, either for his cabinet, government posts, or presidential secretaries, with former prosecutor Lee Bo-kyun becoming the latest to be chosen as the chief of the nation's financial supervisory service. Key U.S. officials do seem to own some experience in the legal field, although not long for some cases when compared to President Yoon's pick for his officials, many of whom are longtime prosecutors. U.S. Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines, for instance, started her career as a legal officer at the Hague Conference on Private International Law over 2 decades ago, after which she worked at the State Department's Legal Advisor Office. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas had previously worked as an assistant attorney, during which he has prosecuted white-collar crimes like tax evasion and money laundering prior to joining the Biden cabinet. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is in fact also an attorney by training, having earned his Juris Doctor degree in 1979. The right kind of expertise and work experience for the right positions. That's been the stance of the presidential office when it comes to personnel appointments. But with controversy still running high on whether Yoon's appointments have been too heavy on those with prosecutorial backgrounds, it remains to be seen how the president will continue to fill his key posts. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Well, that brings us to the end of the first half of the Daily Report. We'll be back in a few minutes with the second half, during which we address the latest on COVID-19. Stay with us.
What matters?
Welcome back. The perception that the pandemic is over is understandable but misguided. Now, this is according to World Health Organization, even as it reports that COVID-19 infections and fatalities appear to be declining in most places. For more on the situation, I have Professor Chung from Hallym University. Professor Chung, welcome back.
Good afternoon.
I also have Professor Mu-Yong Yen at Changsin General Hospital over in Taiwan live on the line. Professor Yen, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon.
Right. We'll start here in the studio with Professor Chung then. Let's start with a rather disturbing finding over in South Africa. I understand officials there recently talked about a fifth wave of COVID-19 over in South Africa, despite the population, 97% of the population there, possessing antibodies from prior infections, vaccinations, or even both. Professor Chung, what does this finding tell us about the risks of reinfection and perhaps a resurgence here in South Korea?
Yes, reinfection exists, and once you get an infection, it does not guarantee the prevention of reinfection, but the rate is very low. The reason why people get reinfected is because antibody level wanes, whether they have got the antibody from previous infection or from vaccination. And there could be an infection from a variant, and some people have no immunity at all from the beginning, whether they got an infection or they got a vaccination. So, but we have definitely our data regarding a reinfection. I'll show you later.
Right. And Dr. Yen then, do start by sharing with us a bit about the COVID-19 situation there in Taiwan.
Okay, Taiwan has been playing quite well in past 2 years because we have prepared us for nearly 20 years. But as you know, recently we have suffered from Omicron tsunami, and for the past 2 months we had, however, we had passed the peak recently and started working toward to live with the COVID like Koreans do right now. I think Taiwan has a benefit in well preparedness and research capacity in the medical system response and so-called traffic control boundary to protect the healthcare systems. And the weakness of the Omicron, it was that we are lacking the mild cases all overwhelmingly crashed the emergency department, and we are lacking the testing capacity. However, we had successfully divided and triaged the patients, the mild cases, into a community through a community screening center, into the primary care physician and home cares. So we are doing quite stable and improving right now. Yeah.
Right, well, that is good to know then. Professor Chung, with regard to reinfections that we spoke about earlier, what does data tell us about the severity of reinfections?
Well, as I said before, we have data from KDCA, and they searched from the beginning of pandemic, January 2020, and until this year, March. So they found 26,000 reinfected patients in our country. And luckily, the severity was very low, 50% lower than a primary infection. The statistics show us 0.06% of mortality and 0.1% of severity transition rate. This is around 50% lower. That is, it's a matter of course, because once you get an infection, the antibody you have in your body, but even though the level is very low, they can cover a certain degree of severity and again, the fatality. And many people have a vaccine already, and they have artificial antibody, whether they have infection or not. And these days, we have seen a very low virulence variants like Omicron. So put all together, the prevalence rate of reinfection in our country is less than 0.5%. So 1 out of 500 will be infected sooner or later. But maybe we have more of infected people in our country, then the reinfection rate will be lower and lower because we have repeated vaccination, booster shot, and the repeated infection, and etc.
Right, hopefully that will be the case. Dr. Yen, based on your understanding of COVID-19, how long does immunity from a prior COVID-19 infection appear to last?
That is a very complicated question. As Professor Zhong just mentioned, it has been an interaction, a very complex of interaction between infection, natural infection, repeated infections, and vaccination and repeated boosting. So, in general, we know that the immunity, the immunity will last 6 months to 9 months. I mean, if we put the B cell, T cell, and memory cell immunity all together, they'll last for 9 months. But when people are considering the antibody response against the COVID-19, they thought about the neutral antibody only, and that's so. In this regard, the repeated boosting vaccination strategy has been dominant around the world. So I would say that in this, the antibody response will last for 3 to 6 months. Okay, when we're looking for the viral variants, mutations, and the repeated boosting and the waning effect of the antibody response. In addition, I think the novel mRNA vaccine had evoked the T cell immunity and will possibly causing some so-called T cell exhaustion. That will also wasting the shortening the effect of the vaccination boosting. I mean, shortening the antibody response effect.
Right, I see. And against that backdrop then, Professor Chung, simply speaking, is it better to seek protection through infection then rather than vaccination? What are your thoughts?
No, once you get an infection, you have to suffering from the disease. So avoidance is the best policy, even in the battle. So in the battle with disease, you have to avoid. You need to avoid the disease itself. You get infected. You are suffering from various symptoms. You have a fear. To maybe you end up with ICUs, and maybe you might be dying from those diseases. And upon that, once you get a vaccination and you have a not low chance of getting infected once you have a vaccination, but the severity is lower and case fatality is far lower once you get a vaccination. So there's no reason why you cannot be vaccinated. So maybe this autumn we'll have another type of vaccination. Moderna is developing a bivalent vaccine, which has 2 different types. One is Delta, and the other one is Omicron. Luckily, still globally, we have still on an Omicron era. Many people thought that maybe another variant will be coming in June or July, but still there is no evidence of new variants. And Omicron is highly transmissible, so high enough to not be passed by another variant. So if the Omicron will be the dominant variant until the coming autumn and winter, then we'll be protected by a bivalent vaccine with Omicron and Delta. Delta is a very virulent one. So by that time, you need to get a vaccination definitely, and you can lower the severity, and you can avoid from the infection, and also lower the fatality.
Right. And Dr. Yen, come June 20th, that would be next Monday, mandatory quarantine for COVID-19 patients here in South Korea may be lifted. That being said, generally speaking, what are your thoughts on the wisdom of this possible lifting of quarantine for COVID-19 patients?
Yeah, to live with COVID needs wisdom indeed. And I support your decision, and that is a wise decision to open your border, because with a milder form of Omicron and the wide coverage of the antibody response, I think the days of testing and quarantine those of asymptomatic cases is over. So, and I think your government has doing a very wise decision, and as a matter of fact, Taiwan is approaching to open the border, on the way to open the border, but we need to pass through the Omicron tsunami first. And you know that South Korea was listed as the second most popular tourist country for Taiwanese. And you can take comfort that the Taiwanese people are very disciplined in wearing masks and alcohol-based hand hygiene. So I think it's very good for the tourists between two countries.
Right. But at the moment, Professor Yen, Dr. Yen, over in Taiwan, the quarantine for travelers still remains in place there, right? The 7-day quarantine for inbound travelers.
Yeah, the 7-day quarantine policy will be changed to 3+4, which means you need 3 days quarantine and 4 days of self-management. Yeah.
I see. All right. Professor Zhang, back here on the local front, temporary COVID-19 screening centers have been shut down, and those suspected of having COVID-19 are now required to visit public health centers to get tested. How does this closure, Professor Zhang, look to affect Korea's containment efforts?
Well, I don't think it affects a lot because it is a bit inconvenient and people will not get tested, and maybe a silent infection will be spreading, or people will be suffering from COVID-19 at a later phase because they didn't get diagnosis. But this time, the disease itself is very mild and getting milder and milder. And rapid antigen test is always available in any private clinic, or most private clinic. And over 60 and older elderly people, the health center is open, and most of people who are over 60 have some time or enough time to visit, get PCR test, which is the most correct one. So I don't think it will affect a lot in the containment policy. So, and whenever it is necessary, the government can open anytime the temporary screening center on maybe next surge, and before the surge, the primary care clinic and the neighboring hospital will be all participating in the diagnosis and also the treatment. So I don't care much about that.
Right. So Professor Chung, you do believe that there will be another surge then?
Sure, maybe, probably, possibly in early autumn, or more probably early winter, because as Dr. Yen said, the antibody wanes in 6 months' time after infection. And after vaccination, antibody lasts only 2 or 3 months. So you have a second booster, first booster, the effective antibody level ends by August. And we have lots of more than 10 million people got infected from January to March and early April. And all antibodies keep waning, and then maybe end of September, most people will not have enough antibody about that. So if virus spreads in our society, then we'll have another surge by that time.
Right, I see. Hopefully it wouldn't be too bad then. Dr. Yen, long COVID appears to have been extensively documented over in the US. Does Taiwan have its own data on this post-COVID syndrome?
Okay, I think in Taiwan, the data is not as many as 10 to 20% as the world reports of the Western countries, because we have so many cases, so little cases before. So actually in January, we do have that kind of case, but less than 5% generally. And in this year, we had, by now we have more than 2 million cases in 2 months. But we still need time to observe and follow up what's going on. But we need to collect, to propaganda for the awareness of long COVID, and surveillance and reporting to gather more information to follow up in the for the policy to make in the future. But however, we should develop an integrated care model and clinics coordinating different medical specialists in different departments to provide a holistic support for the patient care. We can call that would be the new epidemic in the future.
Right, long COVID, of course, then. Professor Chung, I hear young adults account for quite a portion of recent infections here in South Korea. Do you care to explain?
Yeah, the proportion have shifted from elderly to younger. But I think it's not a bad phenomenon, because we are now time to go for a mitigation strategy. That means sufficient or adequate exposure for younger and healthy adults to viruses. And those young and healthy people have a mild symptom and have an antibody, and they do not spread virus anymore for time being, let's say that it's 6 months, then they have a lower chance to transmit to elderly people. So we need to protect the elderly people very intensively, and we need a fast track, and the new government is going to do a fast track. But by doing that, we can lower the severity and lower the case fatality. Then, if the case fatality is very low, no one will be very afraid of any COVID-19. So, gradual exposure and some limited exposure will be necessary for young healthy adults.
Right, of course. Dr. Yoon, across the border over in North Korea, as of this past Monday, the country has reported more than 4 million suspected cases of COVID-19 and 71 related fatalities. What are your thoughts on these tallies, Dr. Yoon?
Yeah, from the data, I would say that either it's making the world record for the COVID-19 pandemic or largely underestimated of the cases due to the issue of transparency in the information sharing. And most of all from the media, I learned that North Korea has only limited testing capacity and depends on many on the symptomatic diagnosis, and that would left nearly half of the asymptomatic cases unidentified. So I think it's more rational to examine the excess death to compare the data with previous years before we can jump into a definite conclusion.
Right, of course. And staying with the situation in North Korea, Professor Chung, what medical support do you believe is of utmost importance to this country should it decide to accept our help?
Well, we need a comprehensive support if they require. But first of all, I would like to emphasize the vaccine again, because prevention is best policy, not to get a disease. Once you get a disease, maybe many people in North Korea have lower nutritional level and lower chronic disease and etc. But in that case, if you diagnose late, no kind of drug can be effective. So vaccination is most effective. And luckily, we have lots of vaccines in our country. And globally, overproduction of vaccine is well known. So either from our country or from other globally, we should provide a vaccine first. But again, the antiviral agent should be supplied for a very severely ill patients in the early phase. And like we do in our hospital, they maybe need a ventilator, artificial ventilation, because in Korea we do not have enough ventilator in Korea, but we have to supply for themselves. And another one is maybe IV fluids like amino acid and 5% distilled water with the glucose in it and etc. And finally, maybe they need a rapid antigen test kits or some PCR tests to diagnose early and to get people in an early phase treatment.
Right, of course. And Dr. Yoon, I understand this is going to be a difficult question, but what do you suppose will be the end game with regard to this pandemic?
The more antibiotic you are using, then you would develop more resistant strain. So you can see this kind of balloon squeezing effect. Now the latest data was up to the Middle East and Southeast Asia, as Taiwan has been involved as well. In addition, in the West Bank of the America is still stirring again. So just as Professor Zhong just said, we should expect some more resurgence of the variants. Okay, so a new normal is needed to change human behavior. I think that will be the most important lesson that COVID-19 taught us. So we should humbly wearing a mask, practice hand hygiene, and to tame the new coronavirus. Okay, and wait for the next generation. It's more safer and more broadly published vaccine, and hopefully we can see the end game in 2023.
Right, next year. I'll keep my fingers crossed for that. All right, Dr. Yoon, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Chung here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
My pleasure.
Thank you both.
29 non-endemic countries have reported cases of monkeypox, which now reportedly tallies at over 1,000 worldwide, according to global health body. Our Kim Hyun-sung has more.
A total of more than 1,000 cases of monkeypox have now been reported outside the West and Central African countries, where the disease is endemic. The World Health Organization on Wednesday said the disease has spread to 29 non-endemic countries. None of them have reported any deaths.
The risk of monkeypox becoming established in non-endemic countries is real.
The WHO chief said that he's particularly worried about high-risk groups. He added that some countries are seeing community infections. But monkeypox isn't a new disease. It's been around for decades in Africa. The WHO said that it's important to remember so far this year that Africa saw more than 1,400 cases and 66 deaths.
It's an unfortunate reflection of the world we live in that the international community is only now paying attention to monkeypox because it has appeared in high-income countries.
Brazil could become the 30th non-endemic country to report a case. According to Reuters, it is also awaiting test results of a suspected case. Health officials in Brazil said the patient, a man in his 40s, had recently traveled to Spain and Portugal. He's been displaying symptoms since late last month and is currently in isolation. The WHO technical lead for monkeypox said that the disease is spread through close interpersonal contact. And as of right now, according to WHO, the window of opportunity is still open to prevent the further spread of monkeypox, especially among those who are most vulnerable. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Also on the international front, residents in the former Ukrainian city of Mariupol are looking to fight another possible battle, this time against cholera, while Russian troops continue to lose their lives amid Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine. Now, this latter grim observation was made by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Paul Neat reports.
Mariupol, a Ukrainian city now occupied by Russian forces after months of relentless bombings, is facing yet another possible crisis. Cholera. An advisor to the city's mayor said Tuesday local time that its drinking water has been contaminated by decomposing garbage and bodies, increasing the risk of a cholera outbreak. According to the WHO, cholera is an acute disease that can kill within hours if left untreated. The same authorities say that a Russian city just across the border is preparing infectious disease units in case of a cholera outbreak. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says deaths of Russian troops has now topped 31,000.
Since February 24th, Russia has been paying for this senseless war against Ukraine, with almost 300 lives of their soldiers daily. Still, the day will come for Russia when the number of losses will go beyond the permissible limit, even for Russia.
During an address posted on his social media, President Zelenskyy said that no significant changes have been made in the last 24 hours as fierce battles in the Donbass region continue. And as the fighting continues, former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, revealed her own personal opinion of the war for the first time since leaving office 6 months ago.
This is a brutal attack, disregarding international law, for which there is no excuse. What happened, in my view, is not only unacceptable, but just a big mistake on Russia's part.
As Chancellor for Germany for 16 years, Merkel had been friendly to Russia and says that she has no regrets for her diplomacy. In the meantime, as part of efforts to help Ukraine get back on its feet, the World Bank has announced that it will provide the country with $1.49 billion. The accumulated total is now beyond $4 billion. The development lender said in a statement that the new financing will be used to pay wages for governmental and social workers. Paul Neat, Arirang News.
Ozone concentration levels here in the country stand at well above those seen when authorities began compiling relevant information back in the year 2001. In fact, last month, that's in May, the average level of this air contaminant hit a record high. Our Choi Min-jung has more on this alarming finding.
Amid a persistent dry spell in South Korea, the average ozone concentration level hit an all-time high in May. According to the Ministry of Environment, the concentration level for last month stood at 0.051 parts per million. This is a 21% increase on year, as well as the highest ever figure reported since data was first compiled in 2001. The ministry says this record is mainly caused by increased solar radiation and a decline in rainfall. The amount of solar radiation recorded in May was 754 megajoules, the highest since 2010. On the other hand, precipitation levels for the same month hit a record low at 5.8 millimeters. Experts say being exposed to high concentrations of ozone may be harmful to people's health, with effects especially seen on the respiratory system, the eyes, as well as skin.
Masks are not helpful in reducing the inflow of the gas into our body, so people should try to stay indoors when there is excessive sunlight.
And at times when ozone levels are high, pundits say people should use public transportation instead of personal vehicles. The government has vowed to strengthen related measures as well as carry out inspections on some 360 companies that contribute significantly to rising ozone levels. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
On a light note now, for those of you who've been tuning into Arirang News, this next story is something we shared earlier. Seoul's first city-run kids cafe opened doors late last month, and my colleague Song Yoo-jin was recently there for a first-hand glimpse. To take a look.
Kids' cafes might conjure up an image of kids sitting to have something to eat or drink, but in South Korea, they are actually indoor playgrounds for children. And there are over 300 of them in the capital, Seoul. But this one is different. This is Seoul's first city-run kids' cafe. Located in the Jongun district, this facility is for kids aged from 3 to 7. There are 3 play areas, one where children can draw, play with colorful yarn, or have fun with fabric. One with a giant trampoline, while another is full of books and board games. Instructors and security personnel are on site to ensure safety. The cost of all this is only 2,000 Korean won, which is around $1.60 for a child and adult. The average entry fee for private kids cafes is almost 8 times higher. The cafe opened late last month, but it is already fully booked until the end of next month.
Most kids' cafes only have rides, so we always had to wait, take turns. I was also worried about accidents, but here it's nice that kids can just run around and play with the toys freely.
Experts say more should be built.
Public kids' cafes are a new form of highly accessible indoor playground. Creating more of them is one of the few effective ways to bring up South Korea's low birth rate.
But private kids' cafes are voicing concerns over the survival of their businesses.
We're not demanding the city to stop building public kids' cafes. We at least hope the city will hand out vouchers that citizens can use at private kids' cafes. They could also operate only on weekdays, as the city created these venues to provide a daycare service.
The city has promised to work closely with the private sector.
To prevent competition with private kids' cafes, all users can stay in the cafe for maximum 2 hours. Also, we are not selling any food or beverages. We'll keep on communicating with the owners for our coexistence.
The city plans to open 20 public kids cafes by the end of this year. The second and third ones will open in the Chunglang-gu and Dongjaku districts in July. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Iran on Wednesday disconnected International Atomic Energy Agency cameras tasked with monitoring the country's nuclear sites. The move came hours before the UN nuclear watchdog adopted a resolution criticizing the country for a lack of cooperation. The IAEA had expressed concerns about traces of enriched uranium found at 3 sites Tehran had not declared as hosting nuclear activities. Diplomatic sources noted that the IAEA censure, the first to criticize Iran since June 2020, was approved by 30 countries and has officially been adopted, with only Russia and China voting against it. The US, the UK, France and Germany have all urged Iran to, quote, cooperate with the IAEA. On Wednesday, Belgium's King Philippe reaffirmed his deepest regrets for his country's exploitation, racism, and acts of violence during its colonization of what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. Philippe also offered a traditional mask of the Suku people as an, quote, indefinite loan. The mask has been held for decades by Belgium's Royal Museum for Central Africa. Congo President Félix Tshisekedi and many politicians have enthusiastically welcomed Philippe's 6-day visit, with large numbers of ruling party supporters waving Belgian flags. But many Congolese were disappointed by the absence of a formal apology for Belgium's colonial atrocities. A car plowed into a crowd of people in the German capital Berlin on Wednesday, killing a teacher and injuring several others, including 14 students. Berlin's fire department said that 6 people sustained life-threatening injuries and 3 others were seriously hurt. The driver, a 29-year-old German-Armenian national, reportedly drove into pedestrians on a sidewalk near Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church at around 10:30 a.m. before crashing into a shop window 1 block away. He has been detained and is receiving treatment in hospital. Investigators are trying to determine whether the attack was deliberate. India's Road Transport Ministry set a Guinness World Record on Wednesday for constructing a 75-kilometre-long highway in just 5 days. This beats the previous 2019 record held by Qatar for a 25-kilometre-long stretch of road that took 10 days to complete. Starting on June 3rd in the western state of Maharashtra, the construction of the single-lane highway was completed on June 7th in a record 105 hours and 33 minutes. Approximately 1,300 workers were tasked with the building of the road. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Thursday afternoon. I hope you brought your umbrella today. Skies are dark and gloomy, and there's already been some drizzle in Seoul, and we're expecting showers in some inland regions with up to 40 millimeters of rainfall. The showers could be intense and powerful, so always keep an eye on your local weather forecast. While checking high temperatures in Seoul, we'll see 25 degrees today. That is 2 degrees lower than average and even lower than yesterday. But from tomorrow, we're back to an above average 29 degrees. And temperatures are really fluctuating these days, as you can see. So keep that in mind for your commute. Well, thanks to the rain, the air quality will be good throughout the day, but there are breezy conditions across the country. Well, overall, highs are similar to yesterday, but eastern regions will stay much colder. And more showers predicted for the weekend, with temperatures soaring to nearly 30 degrees again. Now, let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
Those are the headlines at this hour. Thank you for watching. See you same time on Friday.